Some miracles do not begin with hope. They begin with someone refusing to look away. The river moves quietly beneath a gray November sky, its cold current carrying fallen leaves through the winding forest outside a small Ohio town. From a distance, everything appears peaceful. The water reflects bare branches stretching across the surface, and the only sound is the gentle whisper of wind passing through the trees. Then a single desperate gasp breaks the silence before fading almost as quickly as it came. Emily Carter struggles to keep her head above the freezing water as exhaustion slowly steals the strength from her arms. Her jacket has become heavy, dragging her lower with every passing second. The current has carried her into a narrow pocket between fallen branches where she can barely keep herself from slipping beneath the surface. She reaches toward the muddy bank only a few feet away, but the distance feels impossible. Her fingers brush wet roots before the river pulls her back again. There is no one nearby. No voices answer her fading cries. No passing cars can be heard beyond the thick line of trees. The cold settles deep into her bones until even fear begins to feel distant. She closes her eyes for one brief moment, wondering if this quiet river will become the last thing she ever sees. High above the shoreline, a German shepherd suddenly stops walking. Shadow lifts his head into the wind. His ears stand perfectly still. Every muscle in his body tightens as he stares toward the river below. Beside him, an older man continues along the wooded trail without noticing that the dog has frozen in place. After several steps, he realizes the leash no longer moves. He turns back with quiet curiosity. Shadow is not barking. He is not growling. He simply stares into the trees with an intensity that years of search and rescue work have taught his owner never to ignore. The older man softly calls the dog's name, expecting him to continue walking. Shadow does not move. Instead, he lowers his head, inhales deeply, and lets out one sharp bark before pulling firmly toward the steep riverbank. The leash grows tight. Leaves scatter beneath powerful paws as the German shepherd strains against the restraint with unusual urgency. The older man frowns. During 6 years together, Shadow has never behaved this way without reason. He follows reluctantly, carefully stepping through wet leaves and tangled branches while the dog leads him farther away from the marked trail. The sound of rushing water grows louder with every step. Hidden beneath the wind comes something almost impossible to hear. A weak cough, then silence. Shadow suddenly stops at the edge of the embankment and stares into the swirling current below. His breathing becomes steady, focused, certain. The older man searches the river but sees nothing except drifting branches and dark water reflecting the overcast sky. For a long moment, he wonders if the old rescue dog has remembered a ghost from another lifetime. Then Shadow releases a deep, determined bark unlike any he has heard before, and somewhere beneath the tangled branches along the river's edge, a trembling hand slowly rises above the icy water before disappearing once again. The old man does not hesitate a second time. Years of experience tell him that Shadow has never mistaken fear for certainty, and the determined look in the German shepherd's eyes leaves no room for doubt. He reaches for his cell phone with one hand, while gripping a low tree branch with the other, calling emergency services as he carefully climbs down the muddy embankment. Shadow remains perfectly balanced along the edge, watching every movement below with unwavering focus, his ears fixed on the place where the trembling hand disappeared beneath the tangled branches. The freezing river continues its relentless flow, but somewhere within the narrow pocket between broken limbs and exposed roots, Emily Carter is still fighting to remain conscious. Her breathing has become shallow, and every breath burns against the cold air. The world around her fades in and out as the sound of rushing water slowly drowns every other thought. She barely notices the distant voice calling toward the riverbank. Instead, memories begin drifting through her mind with quiet clarity, as though her heart is searching for something warm before surrendering to the cold. Only yesterday morning, her life had looked completely ordinary. Emily lived alone in a modest white farmhouse just outside the small Ohio town where she had spent nearly her entire life. Every weekday began the same way. She watered the small flower boxes beneath her kitchen window, poured fresh coffee into a faded blue mug that had survived countless mornings, and opened the front door just long enough to breathe the crisp country air before leaving for work. She taught art classes at the local community center, where children, retired neighbors, and young parents gathered each week to paint landscapes, shape clay, and forget life's worries for a little while. Emily believed beautiful things did not have to be expensive to matter. She often reminded her students that even a cracked flower pot could still hold fresh blossoms if someone cared enough to fill it with good soil. Her quiet kindness had become part of the town itself. Elderly neighbors knew she would shovel snow from their sidewalks before they woke. Stray cats somehow found their way to her porch every winter. She always carried extra blankets in the trunk of her old station wagon because someone, somewhere, might need them more than she did. Yet when evening arrived, silence always waited inside her home. The walls held family photographs from years ago, but fewer visitors came with each passing season. Her parents had long since passed away, close friends had moved across the country, and life had slowly become a collection of peaceful routines shared only with herself. Loneliness had never made Emily bitter. It had simply taught her how to appreciate quiet moments that others often overlooked. On the morning before the accident, she packed a small canvas bag with a sketchbook, colored pencils, and a thermos of hot tea before deciding to spend her afternoon beside the river where the autumn colors reflected beautifully across the water. She hoped to sketch the old wooden bridge before winter stripped the last leaves from the trees. It felt like an ordinary decision, the kind that never seems important until life quietly divides itself into everything that happened before and everything that follows after. Back beside the icy river, Emily's fingers weaken against the slippery branches as another wave pushes gently around her. Her eyes struggle to remain open, but somewhere beyond the cold and the rushing current, she hears a dog bark again, stronger this time, closer than before, carrying with it the smallest spark of hope she has felt since the river first pulled her away. The first flash of red and blue emergency lights appears through the trees only minutes later, but time moves differently beside an icy river. Every second feels longer than the last as the older man carefully lowers himself another few feet toward the narrow pocket where the current continues pressing against tangled branches. Shadow refuses to leave the edge. His eyes never wander, his ears remain fixed, and his body leans forward with unwavering determination as though every instinct inside him is telling him that the woman below has not given up yet. The older man calls softly through the rushing water, encouraging Emily to keep breathing even though he cannot tell whether she hears him. Her fingers tremble weakly around a slick branch before slipping again. She manages only the faintest movement, but it is enough. Enough to prove she is still alive. Shadow releases another sharp bark that echoes across the quiet valley, then suddenly becomes completely silent again. That silence tells the older man even more than the barking ever could. The German Shepherd has found exactly what he has been searching for. While waiting for the rescue team to reach the riverbank, the older man cannot stop thinking about the remarkable dog standing beside him. Shadow had not always belonged to him. 6 years earlier, the German Shepherd had served on a regional water search and rescue team, working alongside experienced emergency responders throughout northern Ohio. His extraordinary sense of smell and calm temperament allowed him to locate missing people along rivers, lakes, and flooded woodland trails where visibility often disappeared beneath dense vegetation and shifting currents. During those years, Shadow became known for something unusual among the rescue volunteers. He rarely barked unless he was absolutely certain. Other dogs sometimes reacted to wildlife, distant sounds, or unfamiliar scents, but Shadow seemed able to separate every distraction from the one scent that truly mattered. His focus became legendary within the small rescue organization. When age finally slowed his endurance, the team decided he deserved a peaceful retirement instead of demanding more from a lifetime already devoted to helping strangers. That was when Daniel Harper entered his life. A retired firefighter living quietly outside town, Daniel had volunteered beside the rescue team for years. He had watched Shadow grow from an energetic young working dog into one of the most dependable partners he had ever known. Bringing the German Shepherd home had never felt like adopting an animal. It felt like welcoming an old friend who had earned every peaceful sunrise waiting ahead. Retirement suited Shadow well, at least on the surface. He enjoyed long walks through wooded trails, quiet evenings beside the fireplace, and slow mornings watching birds gather outside the kitchen window. Yet Daniel often noticed something that never disappeared. Whenever they passed moving water, Shadow instinctively paused. He would lift his head into the wind, studying invisible scents carried across the surface with the same quiet concentration he had shown throughout his working years. Daniel never discouraged the habit. Some instincts were too deeply woven into the heart to simply fade away. Now, standing above the cold river while emergency responders hurried closer through the forest, Daniel finally understood that retirement had never erased Shadow's purpose. It had only been waiting for the one moment when someone, somewhere, would need him again. Below the tangled branches, Emily's fading eyes slowly opened once more as she heard another familiar bark drifting across the water, and for the first time since the river had taken hold of her, she no longer felt completely alone. The voices of the rescue team grow louder as boots press through damp leaves and equipment rattles against heavy jackets. But the forest still feels strangely quiet beneath the endless sound of the river. Daniel raises one arm to guide the responders toward the narrow opening in the trees, while never taking his eyes off the water below. Shadow remains frozen at the edge of the embankment, his gaze locked on the same spot where the tangled branches trap the current just enough to keep Emily from drifting farther downstream. One firefighter carefully secures a rope around his waist before making his way down the muddy slope. Another steadies the line from above, while calling reassuring words that drift softly across the water. Emily cannot answer. Her lips tremble from the cold, and her breathing has become little more than slow, uneven whispers. She keeps her eyes fixed on the German shepherd above her, because he is the only thing that feels steady in a world that has become nothing but moving water and fading strength. The firefighter reaches the fallen branches with calm precision, testing each foothold before extending a gloved hand toward her. He speaks gently, asking her to hold on for only another moment. Emily gathers what little strength remains and reaches back. Her fingers barely respond, but they move enough for the rescuer to secure a safety strap around her shoulders. Above them, Shadow lets out one low bark before becoming silent once again, as though he understands that the most difficult part is finally beginning. Slowly and carefully, the rescue team starts lifting Emily away from the current. Every inch requires patience. Broken limbs shift beneath the water, slippery rocks challenge each step, and the cold river refuses to release its grip without resistance. Daniel watches with folded hands, quietly hoping for the outcome that Shadow has believed in from the very beginning. Several long minutes pass before Emily is finally guided onto solid ground. Wrapped immediately in thick emergency blankets, she shivers uncontrollably while paramedics check her pulse and breathing. Someone places a warm oxygen mask over her face. Another carefully speaks her name until her eyes open once more. She does not look toward the flashing lights or the gathering responders. Instead, her gaze slowly searches the hillside until it finds the familiar black and tan silhouette standing perfectly still beneath the bare oak trees. Shadow does not rush forward. He simply watches with calm eyes, his tail making one slow sweep across the damp leaves. Emily cannot explain why, but the sight of him eases a fear she has carried since the river first pulled her beneath its freezing surface. Daniel kneels beside the German shepherd and gently rests a weathered hand against the thick fur around his neck. He whispers only a few quiet words that no one else can hear. Shadow blinks once, never taking his eyes off Emily. As the ambulance doors close and the siren remains mercifully silent for the careful drive toward the hospital, Emily notices one final detail before exhaustion overtakes her again. Around Shadow's neck hangs an old search and rescue identification tag, worn smooth by years of service, catching a single beam of pale afternoon sunlight that slips through the clouds like a promise that had arrived only moments before it was too late. By the time the ambulance reaches Mercy General Hospital, the late afternoon sky has begun to soften into shades of silver and pale blue. Nurses move quickly but calmly, wrapping Emily in warm blankets while doctors continue treating the effects of prolonged exposure to the freezing river. Outside the emergency entrance, Daniel sits quietly on a wooden bench with one hand resting against Shadow's shoulder. The German shepherd has finally lowered himself onto the concrete, but he refuses to close his eyes. Every few moments he lifts his head toward the sliding glass doors, as if expecting someone to walk back outside. Daniel understands that look all too well. It is the same expression Shadow wore after every rescue during his years of service, never satisfied until he somehow knew the person had made it safely home. Hours pass beneath the gentle glow of hospital lights. Coffee grows cold in paper cups. Rain begins tapping softly against the windows. Finally, a physician steps into the waiting area with a tired but reassuring smile. Emily is stable. Her body temperature has returned to a safe level, and while she will need time to recover, she is expected to make a full recovery. Daniel quietly thanks the doctor before looking down at Shadow. The German Shepherd seems to understand without hearing a single word. His ears relax for the first time all day, and his tail gives one slow, gentle sweep across the floor. Early the next morning, sunlight filters through the hospital room, painting warm golden lines across the blanket covering Emily's bed. She wakes slowly, surrounded by the steady rhythm of medical monitors and the comforting scent of fresh coffee drifting through the hallway. For several moments, she simply watches the morning light dance across the ceiling, grateful for something as ordinary as another sunrise. The memories of the river return little by little. The freezing current, the helpless silence, then the dog. She closes her eyes again, wondering if she imagined him during those final moments beside the water. A soft knock interrupts her thoughts. A nurse steps inside carrying breakfast before smiling warmly. She mentions that an older gentleman has been asking about her condition since dawn. Emily quietly asks if he arrived alone. The nurse smiles even wider. She explains that he brought a very patient German Shepherd who has spent nearly the entire morning lying outside the hospital entrance, politely greeting visitors while keeping his eyes fixed on the building. Emily cannot help smiling for the first time since opening her eyes. Something inside her chest feels unexpectedly lighter. Later that afternoon, after receiving permission from hospital staff, Daniel carefully walks Shadow through the lobby. The polished floors reflect the sunlight streaming through tall windows as the German Shepherd moves with calm confidence beside him. Hospital employees pause to admire the quiet dog wearing the weathered search and rescue identification tag that gently swings from his collar. When they reach Emily's room, Shadow stops just outside the doorway. He does not rush inside. He simply waits. Emily slowly turns toward the door, and their eyes meet once again. The room falls completely silent. No words are necessary. The same steady gaze that carried hope across the freezing river now fills the quiet hospital room with something even stronger. It is trust born in a single impossible afternoon, and neither of them fully understands why it already feels as though they have known each other for much longer than a single day. Shadow waits quietly until Emily offers the smallest nod, and only then does he step across the doorway with the same calm confidence that had guided him through countless rescue missions years before. His paws make almost no sound against the polished hospital floor. Daniel follows a few steps behind, removing his cap as he enters the room with the quiet respect of someone who understands that gratitude often arrives without the right words. Emily studies the German Shepherd for a long moment. Up close, she notices the silver hairs beginning to appear around his muzzle, the faint scar above one eye, and the worn leather collar carrying the weathered search and rescue identification tag that had caught the afternoon sunlight beside the river. Shadow slowly approaches the side of her bed before sitting without being asked. His steady amber eyes never leave hers. Emily reaches out carefully, uncertain whether the movement will frighten him. Instead, Shadow gently lowers his head until her fingertips rest against the thick fur behind his ears. It is warm, softer than she imagined. The simple touch somehow dissolves the fear that has lingered inside her since the icy water closed around her. Daniel smiles quietly before pulling a chair closer to the bed. He tells Emily that Shadow always seemed to know exactly how much comfort someone needed without demanding anything in return. During his years on the rescue team, there had been children who refused to speak until Shadow rested beside them, exhausted hikers who found enough strength to stand after seeing the familiar German Shepherd appear through the trees, and frightened families who held on to hope simply because the old rescue dog refused to stop searching. Emily listens carefully, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing the fur along Shadow's neck while sunlight pours gently through the hospital window. She asks how long he served. Daniel answers with quiet pride. Nearly 8 years. Hundreds of training exercises. dozens of successful searches, more lives touched than anyone ever bothered to count. Retirement had come only because age asked for slower mornings, not because Shadow had lost his heart for the work. Emily smiles faintly. She whispers that perhaps some hearts never truly retire. Daniel laughs softly, surprised by how quickly those words seemed to fit the dog sitting beside her bed. The conversation drifts into comfortable silence. Outside the window, autumn leaves dance across the hospital courtyard as visitors move slowly between buildings carrying flowers, balloons, and warm cups of coffee. Inside the room, time seems to slow. Shadow remains perfectly still except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. For the first time in many years, Emily realizes she does not feel alone inside the quiet. She had grown accustomed to empty evenings, peaceful but distant, believing that solitude simply became part of adulthood. Yet somehow, after only a few silent minutes beside an aging rescue dog, the room feels different. Not crowded, not noisy, simply shared. As Daniel prepares to leave so Emily can rest, Shadow stands but hesitates near the doorway. He turns one last time to look at her. Emily smiles and softly says that she hopes she will see him again tomorrow. Shadow gives a slow wag of his tail, as though he understands every word, before walking beside Daniel into the fading afternoon light, leaving behind something invisible that remains long after the room becomes quiet again. 3 days later, the morning air carries the clean scent of pine and damp earth as Emily steps carefully out of Mercy General Hospital with a small overnight bag resting against her shoulder. The doctors have reminded her to take things slowly. Her body still feels tired, and every deep breath reminds her how close she came to losing the simple gift of another sunrise. Yet the first thing she notices is not the crisp autumn breeze or the warmth of the sun breaking through the clouds. It is Shadow waiting beside Daniel near a maple tree at the edge of the parking lot. The German Shepherd rises the moment he sees her. His tail moves in one calm sweep, neither overly excited nor uncertain, as though he simply expected this day to arrive. Emily smiles before she even realizes she is smiling. She walks toward them at an easy pace, and Shadow quietly meets her halfway. This time there is no hesitation between them. She kneels as comfortably as she can and wraps one arm gently around his neck. Shadow leans into the embrace with peaceful confidence, resting his head against her shoulder for only a moment before stepping back. Daniel watches silently, recognizing something that cannot be explained by chance alone. Some connections are built over years. Others are born in a single afternoon that changes two lives forever. Rather than driving straight home, Daniel suggests stopping at a small family diner a few miles outside town. Emily agrees. The smell of fresh coffee, homemade biscuits, and cinnamon welcomes them inside as sunlight pours through wide front windows. Regular customers greet Daniel by name, and nearly everyone smiles at Shadow, who quietly lies beside the booth, while Emily enjoys her first real meal in days. Conversation comes easily. They speak about ordinary things that somehow feel extraordinary after everything that has happened. Emily shares stories about teaching art classes and encouraging children to see beauty in imperfect things. Daniel talks about his years as a firefighter and the peaceful rhythm of retirement. Every now and then, Shadow lifts his head whenever Emily laughs, as though making certain that the sound is real. After breakfast, Daniel drives Emily back to her farmhouse. The gravel driveway crunches beneath the tires as the old pickup truck rolls to a stop. For a moment, Emily simply looks at the familiar white house, the flower boxes beneath the windows, and the wind chimes gently moving beneath the porch roof. Everything appears exactly as she left it, yet nothing feels quite the same. She unlocks the front door and pauses. Home has always been quiet, but today the silence no longer feels empty. Daniel carries her small bag inside, while Shadow patiently waits on the porch until Emily softly invites him to enter. The German Shepherd steps across the threshold with careful curiosity, sniffing the familiar scent of old wood, books, fresh paint, and dried lavender hanging near the kitchen window. His eyes settle on a framed watercolor landscape resting above the fireplace. Emily smiles and explains that she painted it years ago beside the very river where they met. The realization hangs gently between them. Daniel glances toward the painting, then toward Shadow, who quietly sits facing the window where golden afternoon light fills the room. Outside, a gentle breeze stirs the last autumn leaves across the yard. Inside, Emily begins to understand that surviving the river was only the beginning of a story that neither she nor the faithful German shepherd could have imagined when their paths first crossed beside the cold November water. The days that follow settle into a gentle rhythm, shaped by quiet visits and small acts of kindness. Every afternoon, Daniel arrives with Shadow, and every afternoon the old German shepherd walks directly to the front porch as though he already knows the way. Emily keeps a fresh bowl of water beside the steps and laughs softly, the first time she catches herself buying dog treats during a trip to the grocery store. She had never owned a dog before, yet it somehow feels natural to welcome Shadow each time he appears at her door. While Daniel enjoys coffee in the kitchen, Emily and Shadow spend long moments sitting beneath the maple tree overlooking the open field behind the farmhouse. They rarely need company beyond each other. Sometimes Emily sketches while Shadow watches the birds drifting across the pale autumn sky. Sometimes they simply listen to the wind moving through dry grass. The silence no longer reminds Emily of loneliness. It reminds her that peace often speaks without words. As her strength slowly returns, she begins taking short walks across her property. Shadow never pulls ahead. He matches her pace with quiet patience, slowing whenever she slows, stopping whenever she pauses to catch her breath. Daniel notices the change before Emily does. The hesitation that once lingered in every step gradually disappears. Her shoulders straighten. Her smile comes more easily. The fear that had settled deep inside her after the river no longer follows her everywhere she goes. One cool Saturday morning, Emily surprises herself by asking if they can visit the river together. Daniel studies her face carefully before nodding. He understands that healing is not about forgetting difficult places. Sometimes it is about returning to them with new strength. The drive is quiet. Fallen leaves gather along the roadside as sunlight filters through rows of bare oak trees. When they reach the familiar trail, Emily stops for a long moment before taking her first step toward the water. Shadow remains beside her without touching the leash. He watches her carefully but never crowds her space. The river looks completely different now. It still flows with steady confidence, but under the bright morning sun it no longer feels frightening. It simply continues its endless journey, carrying reflections of blue sky instead of dark clouds. Emily walks slowly to the overlook where everything had changed only days before. She closes her eyes and breathes deeply, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. When she opens them again, Shadow is standing beside her, his ears lifted gently toward the moving water. She reaches down and rests her hand against the worn leather collar around his neck. Her fingers brush the weathered search and rescue identification tag once more. This time she turns it over and notices something she had not seen before. Engraved on the back are a few simple words that years of use have almost erased. They read, "Never stop searching." Emily quietly traces the letters with her thumb while emotion fills her eyes. She realizes those words describe far more than the work Shadow once performed. They describe the reason she is standing beneath the warm autumn sunlight, instead of becoming another forgotten memory carried away by the current. Somewhere deep inside her heart, a new purpose begins to take shape, though she cannot yet see where it will lead. The following Monday, Emily unlocks the doors of the Community Art Center for the first time since leaving the hospital. The familiar scent of paint, pine wood, and fresh coffee welcomes her like an old friend who has been patiently waiting. Sunlight pours through the tall windows, warming rows of easels where children will soon gather with brushes in their hands and bright ideas in their hearts. Several co-workers stop what they are doing the moment they see her. Smiles spread across the room. Gentle hugs replace words that seem too small for everything she has survived. Emily assures everyone that she is healing one day at a time. She does not tell them that much of her strength has come from an aging German shepherd whose quiet presence has become part of every hopeful morning. That afternoon, the youngest art class arrives carrying oversized backpacks and endless curiosity. Emily notices something different in herself as she watches them choose colors and spread blank paper across the tables. Before the accident, she had always encouraged creativity with gentle confidence. Now every ordinary moment feels more precious than before. The sound of children laughing, the scrape of pencils across paper, and even tiny drops of watercolor landing on the tables seem like reminders that life is built from simple moments most people never notice until they almost disappear. Near the end of class, one little girl raises her hand and asks what everyone should paint today. Emily pauses beside the window, overlooking the maple trees outside, before smiling warmly. She tells them to paint someone who made them feel safe. Within minutes, the room fills with colorful pictures of parents, grandparents, firefighters, teachers, neighbors, and beloved pets. Emily quietly walks between the easels, encouraging every child without realizing that she has already begun painting in her own heart. After class, she stops by Daniel's house carrying a small wrapped package beneath one arm. Shadow greets her at the front gate with the same calm happiness that has become their quiet tradition. Daniel invites her inside, where the fireplace gently crackles against the cool autumn evening. Emily places the package on the kitchen table before carefully unwrapping it. Inside rests a watercolor painting she finished only the night before. It shows a peaceful river beneath soft morning light, with the silhouette of a German shepherd standing watch along the shoreline. There are no flashing emergency lights, no frightened expressions, and no signs of danger. Only stillness, golden light, and faithful companionship. Daniel studies the painting for several quiet moments before emotion softens his weathered face. He thanks her in a voice barely above a whisper. Emily smiles and explains that some stories deserve to be remembered by their hope instead of their fear. Daniel nods slowly, but before he can answer, he notices Shadow staring toward the front window. The German shepherd's ears lift as though catching a distant sound carried on the evening breeze. He rises calmly and walks onto the porch, gazing toward the road with quiet attention. Emily and Daniel exchange curious glances. Nothing appears unusual, yet Shadow continues watching the fading sunlight with the same focused expression he once wore beside the river, as though somewhere beyond the quiet countryside, another unseen chapter is already beginning to find its way toward them. The next evening, Emily returns to Daniel's farmhouse carrying a small basket filled with homemade chicken soup, fresh cornbread, and apple pie still warm from the oven. The porch light casts a welcoming glow across the weathered wooden steps as Shadow rises from his favorite spot beside the front door. He greets her with one gentle wag of his tail before resting his head briefly against her hand, a quiet ritual that has already become familiar to both of them. Inside, the scent of cedar, coffee, and burning firewood fills the comfortable home. Family photographs line the mantel above the fireplace, capturing decades of ordinary moments that now seem especially meaningful. While Daniel slices the pie in the kitchen, Emily notices an old wooden box resting on a bookshelf near the window. Its brass latch has grown dull with age, and faint scratches cover the lid as though it has been opened hundreds of times. Seeing her curiosity, Daniel carries the box to the coffee table and opens it with slow, careful hands. Inside are faded newspaper clippings, search maps, worn training journals, and photographs of Shadow during his years on the rescue team. Emily lifts one photograph showing a much younger German shepherd standing beside several volunteers after a successful search near a flooded creek. Every face is smiling, but Shadow is looking toward the camera with the same calm focus he still carries today. Daniel smiles quietly before explaining that people often praise the volunteers, yet many rescues would never have happened without the dog leading them to exactly the right place. Emily continues turning the pages until one photograph catches her attention. It shows Shadow sitting alone beside a wide river at sunset, his leash lying untouched on the ground while he stares across the water. The date written beneath the picture is almost 7 years old. Emily looks up, sensing there is more to the story than the photograph reveals. Daniel grows silent for a long moment as the fire crackles softly beside them. Finally, he explains that shortly before Shadow retired, the rescue team spent nearly 2 days searching for an elderly fisherman who had disappeared after his small boat drifted away during a storm. Throughout the search, Shadow refused to leave one quiet stretch of shoreline. Long after the volunteers had begun looking elsewhere, he continued returning to the same place again and again. Eventually, the team discovered the missing man alive beneath a fallen tree where the current had carried him into a sheltered bend of the river. The doctors later said that only a little more time would have changed everything. Daniel gently closes the wooden box before looking toward the German shepherd sleeping peacefully near the fireplace. He says there has always been something remarkable about the way Shadow listens to water. Not just the sound of it, but the stories it carries. Emily feels a quiet chill despite the warmth of the room. She remembers the weathered words engraved on the old rescue tag, "Never stop searching," and realizes they were never simply a training motto. They had become the way Shadow lived every ordinary day of his life. As the evening settles into comfortable silence, Emily watches the aging German shepherd resting peacefully in the firelight and silently wonders how many unseen lives had continued because one faithful dog refused to believe that hope had already drifted away. Over the following weeks, the quiet friendship between Emily, Daniel, and Shadow becomes something the entire town begins to notice without anyone trying to explain it. On Saturday mornings, people gathering at the farmer's market smile as the old German shepherd walks patiently beside Emily, accepting gentle pats from children and warm greetings from neighbors who remember his years with the rescue team. At the Community Art Center, Emily starts a new project that she simply calls Stories of Hope. Instead of asking her students to paint perfect landscapes or carefully measured portraits, she invites them to capture moments when kindness changed someone's life. The room fills with paintings of grandparents holding tiny hands, neighbors helping after heavy snowstorms, firefighters carrying frightened pets, and faithful dogs waiting beside front doors. Emily hangs every picture along the hallway walls, believing that courage deserves to be seen in ordinary places. One afternoon, the local newspaper visits the art center after hearing about the woman who survived the river and the retired rescue dog who refused to leave her behind. The reporter politely asks Emily whether she considers herself lucky. She pauses before answering. Looking across the room where Shadow is quietly resting while children paint nearby, she gently shakes her head. She says luck disappears as quickly as a passing storm. Faithfulness stays. The simple sentence appears in the newspaper the following Sunday beneath a photograph of Emily kneeling beside Shadow beneath the maple tree outside her farmhouse. The story spreads farther than anyone expects. Letters begin arriving from neighboring towns. Some come from families whose loved ones had once been found by search and rescue teams. Others come from people who simply wanted to thank an old German shepherd for reminding them that compassion still exists in the world. Emily reads every letter aloud while Shadow rests peacefully at her feet. Daniel listens from his favorite chair with quiet gratitude shining behind tired eyes. One crisp autumn afternoon, the rescue organization that Shadow had served for so many years invites them to visit during a volunteer training day. As they arrive, younger search dogs practice simple scent exercises across open fields while new volunteers learn navigation and emergency procedures. Several experienced handlers immediately recognize Shadow. They kneel beside him, smiling as they gently scratch behind his ears and laugh about the countless times he had quietly proven everyone else wrong by refusing to abandon a search too soon. Emily watches these conversations with growing admiration. She realizes that the river did not reveal greatness inside Shadow. It merely introduced her to a greatness that had been quietly serving strangers for years. Before leaving, the training coordinator presents Daniel with a framed photograph taken during Shadow's final rescue season. Along the bottom of the frame is a small engraved plaque that reads, "Hope sometimes walks on four paws." Daniel quietly hands the frame to Emily. He tells her it belongs where it will inspire the most people. Emily accepts it with tears shining gently in her eyes, already knowing the perfect place for it inside the Community Art Center. As the sun begins sinking behind the rolling Ohio hills, Shadow lifts his head toward the golden light stretching across the open field. The breeze gently stirs his thick coat while dozens of younger rescue dogs continue their training in the distance. And for a quiet moment, it almost seems as though every one of them is following a path that the old German shepherd had helped create long before they ever took their first step. As November slowly gives way to the first quiet days of December, the town begins preparing for its annual winter festival, a tradition built on warm lights, handmade decorations, and neighbors gathering simply because they enjoy being together. This year, Emily volunteers to organize a special art exhibit inside the community center. Instead of displaying famous paintings or professional work, she fills the walls with the creations of children, veterans, retired teachers, firefighters, and families who answered one simple question: what does hope look like to you? The answers arrive in every color imaginable. Some paint bright sunrises after long storms. Others paint open front doors, worn work boots, family dinners, or faithful companions waiting patiently at the end of long days. Near the center of the room hangs Emily's watercolor of the quiet river beneath soft morning light, with a single German shepherd standing watch along the shoreline. Beneath the painting, she places a small wooden plaque containing only 4 words: never stop searching. She never explains their meaning. She does not need to. Visitors pause before the painting longer than any other piece in the exhibit. They seem to understand something without anyone speaking it aloud. Daniel arrives early on opening day, with Shadow walking calmly beside him. The old German shepherd moves more slowly than he once did, his silver muzzle catching the gentle afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, but his eyes remain as steady as ever. Children recognize him immediately from the newspaper story and quietly gather around, asking if they may pet the retired rescue dog. Daniel smiles and nods. Shadow greets each child with the same patient kindness that has followed him throughout his life. Emily watches from across the room, realizing that courage does not always appear in dramatic moments. Sometimes it sits peacefully on a polished wooden floor while children laugh nearby. Later that afternoon, the town mayor steps forward to thank the volunteers who helped organize the festival. Without warning, he invites Daniel and Shadow to stand beside him. The applause that fills the room is warm rather than loud, the kind that comes from genuine gratitude instead of celebration. Daniel looks slightly embarrassed by the attention, but Emily notices something different. Shadow simply sits beside him, unconcerned with applause, cameras, or recognition. His attention remains fixed on the smiling faces surrounding him, as though the happiness of strangers has always been enough. Before the ceremony ends, Emily quietly carries the framed photograph from the rescue organization to the front of the room. She places it beside her watercolor, allowing both images to tell a single story together. One captures years of faithful service. The other captures the peaceful life that grew from one unforgettable afternoon. As evening settles over the small Ohio town, families begin walking home beneath glowing holiday lights, while soft snowflakes drift gently through the cold air. Emily locks the doors of the community center and steps outside beside Daniel and Shadow. She looks across the quiet street, then down at the faithful German shepherd walking calmly between them. For the first time in many years, the future no longer feels uncertain. It feels open, generous, and quietly waiting, just like the path stretching ahead beneath the first snowfall of winter. Spring arrives quietly in the little Ohio town, almost as though the earth itself has decided to begin again. The maple tree outside Emily's farmhouse fills with fresh green leaves. Wildflowers return to the edges of the old walking trail, and the river flows beneath clear blue skies with the same steady voice it carried long before anyone knew how deeply one afternoon could change so many lives. On a cool Saturday morning, Emily, Daniel, and Shadow make their way back to the overlook where everything began. The path no longer feels heavy beneath Emily's feet. She walks with calm confidence, carrying nothing more than a small canvas sketchbook tucked beneath one arm. Shadow moves beside her at an easy pace, his silver muzzle brighter now beneath the gentle sunlight. Yet his eyes remain full of the quiet wisdom that has guided him through every season of his life. When they reach the riverbank, Emily sits on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the water while Daniel settles beside her. For several peaceful minutes, none of them speaks. There is no need to fill the silence. The river continues its endless journey, carrying reflections of drifting clouds instead of fear. Birds glide low across the water before disappearing into the trees. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring softly through the morning air. Emily opens her sketchbook and begins drawing without hurry. This time she does not paint the moment she was rescued. She does not paint the ambulance, the cold water, or the frightened memories that once filled her dreams. Instead, she sketches an old German shepherd sitting beside the river beneath the first light of dawn, watching the world with patient eyes while gentle sunlight reaches across the water. Daniel quietly smiles as he recognizes the image taking shape. Shadow rests comfortably at their feet, occasionally lifting his head to follow the breeze before closing his eyes again, completely at peace. Emily finishes the final brushstroke of color she had prepared at home and carefully tears the page from the sketchbook. She folds it once and places it inside a simple wooden frame Daniel brought in his backpack. Together, they carry the frame to a small post near the trail where hikers often pause to admire the view. There is no grand ceremony, no speeches, only a small plaque beneath the painting that reads, "In honor of every faithful heart that refuses to stop searching." Visitors who pass the overlook in the months ahead often stop to study the quiet painting. Some smile. Some wipe away unexpected tears. Many continue walking without saying a word, carrying something invisible with them as they disappear along the winding trail. Years later, children who once painted pictures inside Emily's art classes grow into adults with families of their own. They still remember the gentle German shepherd who visited the classroom and quietly reminded them that courage does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it waits patiently beside a river. Sometimes it walks beside someone who believes they have been forgotten. And sometimes the greatest miracle is simply discovering that kindness arrived before hope disappeared. As the morning sun climbs higher above the trees, Emily gently rests her hand against Shadow's weathered collar one last time before the three friends begin the slow walk home together. Behind them, the river keeps flowing toward places unseen. Ahead of them, the trail stretches into warm, golden light. And between those two endless horizons, one faithful dog leaves behind a quiet reminder that the smallest act of mercy can become the beginning of someone else's forever.